Welcome, traveler, to old worlds for sleep. Here, beneath the whispering oaks and the flicker of firelight, we journey into the past, where legends breathe and forgotten voices rise again. Tonight, we follow the story of Robin Hood. Not just the outlaw in green, but the man exiled into Sherwood Forest, forced to choose between survival and justice. A tale of loyalty, rebellion, and hope carried on the wind of medieval England. Close your eyes, breathe deep, and let the shadows of Sherwood guide you. The sheriff's cruelty, the people's defiance, and the birth of a legend await. This is more than a story, it is a world of old retold for you to dream and drift into rest. The forest swallowed him whole. Robin of Locksley pushed deeper into Sherwood, boots crunching over frosted leaves, breath steaming in the cold autumn air. Behind him, the world he had known, his manor, his lands, even his wife and son, lay beyond reach. Ahead stretched only the unknown. The towering oaks rose like cathedral pillars, their bare branches scratching the gray sky. In that endless silence, the young man who had once been lord of a village was nothing more than a hunted fugitive. The sheriff's warrant still burned in his mind. Outlaw. That word had stripped away every protection he had once taken for granted. No law now shielded him. No hearth was safe to rest in. If captured, his fate would not be trial or mercy but the hangman's noose. He carried only his bow, a quiver half full of arrows, and the ache of exile in his chest. The forest was vast, but it was not kind. His first nights were spent crouched beneath makeshift shelters of branches and brush, waking shivering from cold and nightmares alike. Hunger gnawed at him constantly. Once he had known full tables, roasted meats, and barrels of ale. Now he chased rabbits through undergrowth, sometimes catching nothing for days. He learned the taste of roots and bitter berries, the way rain seeped into bones when firewood was too wet to burn. But the greenwood also held moments of strange grace. At dawn, mists curled like veils among the oaks, and shafts of light turned frost into scattered jewels. Owls called in the distance. Deer stepped silently through thickets, unafraid of the lonely man watching with hollow eyes. In those moments, Robin felt a flicker of something, freedom, perhaps, or destiny. Nights were harder. In the quiet, grief pressed in with unbearable weight. He saw Marion's face in the firelight, remembered his son's small hand gripping his thumb. He imagined them alone in Locksley under the sheriff's gaze. Was Marion safe? Did the boy ask after him? Each thought cut deeper than hunger. He wore a pendant she had carved for him once, a small stag of wood, now hanging heavy against his chest. It became both comfort and torment. Still, Robin endured. Survival hardened him. His bow, once a sport of tournaments, became his lifeline. He grew sharper, quicker, more silent. He read tracks in the mud, judged the wind by the rustle of leaves. Slowly, the forest began to feel less like a prison and more like a teacher. Yet, even as he adapted, a question haunted him. Was survival enough? He had not chosen exile simply to live like a beast in the woods. The sheriff had stolen more than his lands. He had stolen justice, twisting the law to crush the weak and fatten the powerful. Robin's own suffering was only one piece of a larger cruelty. The villages whispered of starvation under new taxes, of men whipped for failing to pay, of women driven from their homes. And now Robin had nothing left to lose. On a brittle morning, he climbed a low ridge and looked out over Sherwood's endless sprawl. The sun rose, gilding the trees in pale fire. Robin clenched his bow until his knuckles whitened. Here, hidden in the heart of the greenwood, he would not only survive, he would fight. If the law branded him outlaw, then let him become the outlaw the people needed. For now, he was only one man with a bow. But the forest was wide and his cause just. And legends, he thought with a grim smile, had to begin somewhere. The forest may have been vast, but even in Sherwood, no man could remain alone forever. Robin had learned to move quietly, to sleep lightly, and to vanish when danger stirred. Yet even his sharpened senses could not prevent the sudden crack of a branch one morning, echoing too close behind him. Instinct took over. In a heartbeat, his bow was raised, an arrow notched, his body tense as a drawn string. From behind the oak stepped the giant of a man. He carried no bow, only a quarterstaff as thick as a sapling, and his grin split a broad face marked with both mischief and challenge. "Well now," the stranger boomed, planting his staff in the earth. "What have we here?" A lone hunter who thinks himself king of Sherwood. Robin kept the bow steady. "I'm no king. Just a man who wishes to be left in peace." The stranger laughed, deep and booming. "Peace is it? Then put down that twig of yours and meet me like a man. Staff to staff here by the stream. Unless you've no stomach for a fair fight." Pride flickered hot in Robin's chest. He lowered the bow slowly, slid it over his shoulder, and accepted the challenge. They met on the narrow footbridge spanning a rushing brook, quarterstaffs ringing like iron as they clashed. The stranger's strength was immense. Each blow rattled Robin's arms, each strike threatening to pitch him into the water below. Yet Robin's speed and cunning turned the match into a dance of feints and parries. Back and forth they fought, until with one mighty swing, the stranger caught Robin square on the shoulder. Down he went into the brook with a splash. The stranger roared with laughter. "Well struck, I'd say. Not many can stand against Little John so long." Robin emerged, drenched and sputtering, but grinning despite himself. "Little John, is it? A poor name for a man of your size." They clasped hands, laughter echoing in the woods. A bond had been forged not in words but in trial. From that day Little John stood at Robin's side, his staff as loyal as Robin's bow. More companions followed. On a cold night by the fire, two young men crept into the clearing. Will Scarlet, his face marked by an old scar and eyes burning with restless fire, and Much, the miller's son, whose family had been driven into poverty by the sheriff's crushing levies. They came wary but desperate, asking if the tales whispered in the villages were true, that a man in green defied the sheriff here in the forest. Robin had no legend to offer them, only his cause. "I cannot promise safety," he said, voice low but steady. "Only that we will fight injustice together. The sheriff has branded me outlaw. If you walk with me, you'll share that fate." Will Scarlet bared his teeth in a half-smile. "Outlaw or no, better the forest than the sheriff's rope. I'll take my chances with you." And Much, younger and less certain, still nodded. "My father starved paying the sheriff's taxes. If I can put a loaf of bread back on some family's table, it's worth it." Thus the band grew. No longer a lone fugitive, Robin found himself surrounded by men who shared his hunger for justice, his anger at oppression, his willingness to risk everything. Nights by the fire no longer echoed with silence, but with stories, laughter, and the crack of staffs against bark as they trained together. For the first time since exile, Robin felt something like hope stir within him. These men were not bound by blood or law, but by choice. And sometimes choice forged stronger bonds than either. Sherwood itself seemed to change. Paths became familiar trails. Hidden hollows became places of refuge. The sound of voices carried through the trees, no longer lonely but alive. Together they hunted, trained, and shared their meager spoils. Slowly, what had been a life of mere survival became the beginnings of something greater. A fellowship, forged in exile, that would one day shake the very walls of Nottingham. Robin looked around at his companions, their faces lit by firelight, their eyes fierce and unbroken despite hardship. He realized, with a weight like destiny settling upon him, that he was no longer just fighting for himself. He was leading men, and soon, perhaps, more than men. The Sheriff of Nottingham had cast him into the forest hoping to bury him in obscurity. Instead, here among the towering oaks, Robin Hood was beginning to rise. Sherwood gave, but Sherwood also tested. For every rabbit caught in a snare, there were 2 nights of emptiness. For every hidden clearing that seemed safe, there was the risk of patrols stumbling upon their fires. Robin's band had grown, but with numbers came new challenges. 6 men now shared the forest shelters. Robin, Little John, Will Scarlet, Much the miller's son, and 2 others drawn by whispered rumors. Tom, a woodsman who had lost his cottage to debt, and Alan, a minstrel too sharp-tongued for the sheriff's liking. They were a ragged group, united by necessity more than discipline. The first true camp was nothing more than a ring of crude shelters, branches lashed with bark, moss piled into bedding. Smoke from their fires was carefully channeled through layers of leaves to hide the plume. Food was rationed in small bowls, and arguments often flared when one man thought another had taken more than his share. Little John's booming laugh sometimes softened the tension, but not always. Will Scarlet, with his fiery temper, bristled at every slight. Much, young and eager, tried to please everyone but often made mistakes. And Robin, though their natural leader, found himself caught between roles he had never asked for: provider, peacemaker, strategist. One night, after a long day of hunting yielded only 2 scrawny hares, the mood around the fire turned dark. Scarlet threw his knife into the dirt. "We'll starve before the sheriff ever finds us," he spat. "Better we march on Nottingham and die with a blade in hand than waste away here like beggars." "Reckless talk," Little John countered, his deep voice steady. "One charge into the sheriff's men and we'd be slaughtered before we saw the gates. The forest is our strength, not their walls." Scarlet glared. "And what good is a forest when our bellies are empty?" Robin let the words hang in the night air, his gaze fixed on the flicker of the flames. He understood Scarlet's anger because it mirrored his own doubts. What had he truly built? A handful of outcasts hiding like hunted deer, scraping for scraps, while the sheriff grew fat on taxes. Was this survival or merely a slower kind of death? Alan, the minstrel, plucked a few soft notes on his lute, breaking the silence. "Legends aren't born in comfort," he said quietly. "They're born in hunger, in fire, in desperation. Perhaps one day, people will sing of men like us who stood against the sheriff, even if the forest kills us first." The men chuckled bitterly, but Robin's heart stirred at Alan's words. Could it be true? Could their suffering mean more than survival? The next morning, Robin set them tasks. Much and Tom would forage for roots and berries. John and Scarlet would patrol the edges of the camp for signs of the sheriff's men. Alan would travel to the village disguised as a wandering musician, listening for news and gossip. Robin himself would hunt. When they returned that evening, the mood was lighter. Scarlet had spotted smoke from a patrol in the distance, proof that the sheriff had not forgotten them, but also a sign that they mattered enough to be hunted. Alan brought word that villagers whispered of an outlaw band in Sherwood who defied the sheriff's law. Though half the tales were exaggerations, there was awe in them. The people needed a story, and Robin's band was becoming that story. Still, the camp remained fragile. They had no permanent stores, no true defenses, no guarantee they could survive the coming winter. At night, Robin lay awake staring into the branches overhead, Marion's pendant heavy against his chest. He imagined his son's small hand, Marion's steady eyes, and wondered if they would be proud of what he was building, or mourn it as folly. Yet when morning came, he rose again, stringing his bow and tightening his belt, ready to face another day in the Greenwood. For all its hardships, Sherwood gave him something no sheriff's decree could ever take: freedom. And in that fragile freedom, a fire was kindling. The band was small, their camp precarious, their future uncertain. But in those cold, hungry nights, a fellowship was forming. One day, Robin knew, it would grow into something far stronger than any law the sheriff could wield. The forest was vast, but news traveled swiftly along its hidden veins. A whisper in a tavern, a mutter at the mill, a minstrel's tune hummed in passing, all carried word of Robin and his band. And just as swiftly as tales spread among villagers, they reached the Sheriff of Nottingham. The sheriff was not a man to let defiance go unanswered. To him, Robin Hood was not merely a fugitive, but a threat, a spark in dry tinder that, if unchecked, might ignite the whole shire in rebellion. And so he sent men into Sherwood. The outlaws first saw them on a misted morning. Robin and Little John were ranging near the edge of the forest when the sound of hooves reached their ears. Slipping into cover, they watched 6 mounted soldiers ride the narrow road. Their helmets gleamed, crossbows hung at their sides, and their horses snorted clouds into the chill air. "They're hunting us," John muttered, eyes narrowing. "Or making a show of it," Robin replied softly. But he knew better. The sheriff's men did not waste time patrolling in force unless they believed the prey was near. They tracked the patrol through the trees, keeping to shadow. At one point, the soldiers dismounted, prodding at tracks in the mud. Robin's heart clenched. Much had passed that way earlier, carrying snares for rabbits. The prints were fresh. When the soldiers turned toward the deeper forest, Robin knew they could not be allowed to stumble upon the camp. He signaled John, and the two moved swiftly to intercept. What followed was the first true clash between the sheriff's men and Robin's band. John burst from the undergrowth, staff swinging like a thunderbolt, knocking one soldier clean off his horse. Robin loosed an arrow that split another's crossbow in half before it could be raised. Horses reared, shouts rang through the trees, steel met wood. The fight was brief, chaotic, and desperate. Scarlet and Much, hearing the cries, joined in from the flanks, pelting the soldiers with stones and arrows. In the end, the patrol fled, 2 men injured, the rest dragging them back toward Nottingham. Breathing hard, Robin watched them vanish down the road. He knew this was only the beginning. The sheriff would not see a scattered scuffle. He would see defiance, open and undeniable. And for every defeated patrol, stronger ones would follow. That night around the fire, the men argued fiercely. "They'll be back with 20 more," Will Scarlet said, pacing like a caged fox. "We should vanish deeper into the greenwood before they find us. And leave the villages to the sheriff's mercy?" Much countered, his young face pale but stubborn. "He already takes everything. If we run, who will stand for them? Who are we to stand for anyone?" Scarlet snapped. "We're starving ourselves, hiding like foxes, scraping bark for bread." The firelight flickered on Robin's face as he listened. He felt the weight of their words pressing like the sheriff's noose around his neck. He had not sought followers. He had not asked to be their leader. And yet, here they were looking to him for an answer. "We are outlaws," Robin said at last, his voice calm but carrying. "The sheriff has branded us thieves, traitors, criminals. Very well. If that is what we are, then let us use it against him. We know the forest as he never will. We can strike where he is weakest, vanish where his men cannot follow. And if we take what he has stolen, we return it to the people he robs." Silence followed. Even Scarlet's restless pacing stilled. "Rob the sheriff," much breathed, awe dawning in his voice. "Not for ourselves," Robin said firmly. "For those who cannot fight. For the hungry. For the wronged. If we are outlaws, then let us be outlaws with honor." Around the fire, heads slowly nodded. The fear in their eyes did not vanish, but something else stirred their purpose. That night, under the ancient oaks, Robin Hood's band ceased to be fugitives merely clinging to survival. They became something more dangerous to the sheriff than any army. Men with a cause, sharpened by desperation, driven by justice. And somewhere in Nottingham, the Sheriff of Nottingham felt the first stirrings of unease. The night was cold, the kind that cut straight through cloak and skin. The fire in the camp burned low, its smoke carefully shielded beneath layers of pine boughs so as not to betray their hiding place. Robin sat awake, sharpening an arrowhead with his small knife. The rhythm of the blade on steel kept his thoughts steady, though unease gnawed at him. Sherwood was alive with sounds, owls calling, leaves whispering, branches creaking, but tonight there was something else. Something heavier, like a presence beyond the darkness. A twig snapped. Robin's head lifted instantly. His hand went to his bow, notching an arrow in silence. Little John stirred from his bed of furs, sensing the tension. Will Scarlet, half asleep, muttered but reached for his dagger. Robin raised his hand, a silent command for quiet, then slipped into the shadows beyond the camp. He moved like a hunter, every step soft on the frozen ground. The moon was a thin crescent, giving only slivers of light through the forest canopy. At the edge of the clearing, he caught sight of a figure, a man gaunt and weary stumbling between the trees. His cloak was torn, his boots caked with mud, his eyes hollow. And clinging to his arm was a small boy, no older than 6, his cheeks sunken with hunger. "Stay where you are," Robin called, his voice sharp though not unkind. The man froze. His voice cracked as he answered, "Please, I mean no harm." He took a shaky step forward, pulling the boy closer. "We've nowhere else to go. The sheriff's men, they took everything." Robin lowered the bow but did not release the string. He motioned for John and Scarlet to join him. The man collapsed to his knees, holding the boy in trembling arms. "My name is Edward," he whispered. "This is my son Thomas. They burned my mill when I could not pay the tax. My wife," his voice broke. "They dragged her away to Nottingham. I don't know if she lives." For a long moment, silence hung heavy. The forest itself seemed to listen. Scarlet scowled, his hand tight on his dagger. "We can't take every beggar into Sherwood. One mouth becomes 10. The sheriff's eyes are everywhere." But little John crouched beside Edward, his great hand gentle on the boy's shoulder. "Look at him, Will. Do you see a threat in this child?" The boy blinked up at them with wide, frightened eyes, clutching a wooden toy soldier carved crudely from oak. His small fingers were blue with cold. Robin's heart clenched. He thought of his own son, the boy growing without him in Locksley, asking questions Marion had to answer alone. He thought of the sheriff's greed, of the fire in Edward's voice when he spoke of injustice. Here was not a beggar, but another life shattered by cruelty. "You may stay," Robin said at last. His tone was firm, leaving no room for argument. "But understand this, Sherwood is no haven of safety. Here you fight to live. If you can bear that, then you are one of us." Edward bowed his head in gratitude, tears shining in his eyes. Thomas pressed closer to his father, but the toy soldier dropped from his hand. Robin picked it up, studying the rough carving before placing it back gently in the boy's palm. "Hold tight to it," he said softly. "You'll need courage in this forest." That night, Edward and Thomas shared the campfire. The boy ate hungrily, his thin frame shaking with the effort, while Edward stared into the flames with a hollow gaze that slowly filled with something else: belonging. The next days proved the truth of Robin's words. Edward was no burden. He cut wood, fetched water, repaired shelters with skill learned from years of tending his mill. And when much asked about his wife, Edward spoke of her not as a lost soul, but as someone to be fought for. The band listened in silence, each man reminded that their cause was not just their own survival. The sheriff's cruelty was a tide drowning countless families, and Sherwood was becoming not merely a refuge, but a fortress of defiance. Robin lay awake that night, Marion's pendant cool against his chest. He thought of Edward, of Thomas, of the faces that would soon come seeking shelter. Sherwood was changing. What began as a handful of men hiding in the trees was becoming something greater, a sanctuary for the broken, a seed of rebellion. And though it frightened him, Robin knew there was no turning back. The first snow fell heavy, blanketing the forest in silence. The great oaks groaned under its weight, branches sagging like weary arms. Paths once familiar vanished beneath white drifts, leaving only faint deer tracks and the winding trails the outlaws themselves carved through the frost. For Robin's band, the season was cruel. Food grew scarce. Hunting became treacherous. Snares often came up empty, and deer retreated deep into thickets where even Little John's keen eyes struggled to follow. Foraging was impossible. The earth slept beneath its icy cover, and what roots could be found were bitter and thin. Around the campfire, meals shrank. Porridge stretched thin with water. A rabbit divided among 10 men. Edward gave his portion to young Thomas more often than not, his own ribs showing beneath his tunic. Will Scarlet muttered curses at their lot, while Much tried to make jokes that fell flat in the cold air. The forest that had once seemed alive with promise now felt like a prison of snow and hunger. Robin bore the weight of every empty bowl. At night, as the others huddled in their shelters, he paced the clearing, mind burning with questions. How could they endure this? Was it folly to drag others into his outlaw life only to let them starve? He thought of Marion and their son, safe perhaps in Locksley, but surely not untouched by the sheriff's greed. He thought of Edward's wife, taken to Nottingham, her fate unknown. The burden pressed heavier than the snow itself. One evening, as the fire guttered low, Friar Tuck appeared again. His round figure emerged from the shadows, robe dusted with frost, his eyes alight with warmth despite the cold. He carried a sack slung over his shoulder and set it down with a grunt beside the fire. "Bread," he announced simply. Inside were coarse loaves, dried apples, and a small wheel of cheese. Gifts from villagers who remember who you are, Robin. They speak of the man who stood against the sheriff's men, who saved Edward from the gallows. The people are watching. They hope. Hope. The word flickered like a spark in Robin's chest. But Tuck's face sobered as he leaned close. "Hope alone will not keep them fed," he said softly. "The sheriff grows greedier. He bleeds the villages dry. Soon he will demand more than coin, he will take their winter stores. And when that day comes, Robin, you must decide. Will you remain a hunted man clinging to survival, or will you become what they already whisper of? A champion." Robin met Tuck's gaze across the fire. "And if I fail? If I lead these men to their deaths?" "Better to fail in defiance of cruelty," Tuck answered, "than to live quietly while children starve." The word struck true. Robin felt the gnaw of hunger not just in his belly, but in his spirit. It was not enough to survive. To endure this winter, to keep his band alive, they had to become more than fugitives. They had to fight not only for themselves, but for every family the sheriff sought to crush. The next morning, Robin gathered the band. Their breath misted in the cold, their eyes hollow with weariness. "We cannot rely on the forest alone," he told them. "The sheriff grows fat while we scrape bark for bread. No more. We will take what he has stolen and we will give it back to those who need it. If we must be outlaws, let us be outlaws for the people." There was silence, then the slow rumble of Little John's agreement. Better to fight with empty bellies than waste away doing nothing. Even Scarlet, who had cursed their hunger the night before, gave a sharp nod. Much clapped Edward on the shoulder, and the miller's gaunt face lit with something almost like hope. It was decided. No longer would they simply hide in Sherwood. The sheriff's men had called them outlaws. Now Robin would turn that name into a weapon. As the wind howled through the bare branches, Robin strung his bow and set his jaw. Hunger had tested them. Resolve had been born. The Greenwood would no longer be a place of hiding. It would become a battleground. And in that moment, though he could not yet see the future, Robin Hood took his first true step toward legend. Snow clung to the branches like lace, and the air stung with the sharp bite of winter. Robin's band had grown lean from hunger, but their spirits were sharpened by resolve. They had chosen not to fade into the forest but to fight back. Their chance came sooner than expected. Word reached them through Friar Tuck. Edward, the miller who had sought refuge with them, had been captured in Locksley. He had slipped into the village to barter for food and was recognized by one of the sheriff's informants. The sheriff's men dragged him to the square, announcing he would hang by sundown as a warning to others who aided outlaws. The news spread through the band like fire. Thomas, Edward's young son, clung to Much, sobbing into his cloak. Little John's fists clenched, the wood of his staff creaking under the pressure. Will Scarlet cursed and spat into the snow. Robin said nothing at first. He stood apart, staring into the distance, his heart heavy. He thought of Marion, of his own son. What if it were them taken? The sheriff sought to break more than Edward. He sought to break the outlaw band's spirit, to make their defiance seem hopeless. Robin knew this was a test, one they could not afford to fail. At last he turned to his companions. We cannot let Edward die. If we do, the sheriff wins. Tonight we go to Locksley. Tonight we take him back. The band moved swiftly, cloaks drawn tight, weapons ready. They reached the edge of Locksley at dusk. Smoke rose from chimneys, and the faint bells of the church echoed across the frozen fields. In the village square, a wooden gallows had already been erected, stark against the gray sky. Edward stood bound beneath it, his head bowed, guards stationed nearby with torches and swords. Villagers watched in silence, fear heavy on their faces. Robin's men slipped into position. Much circled wide to cut Edward's bonds when the moment came. Alan the minstrel positioned himself near the tavern, ready to cause a distraction. Scarlet crouched in the shadows with a dagger in each hand, eyes sharp. Robin himself melted into the crowd, hood drawn low, bow hidden beneath his cloak. When the sheriff's sergeant stepped forward to declare Edward's sentence, Alan struck the first spark. He leapt onto a barrel and began strumming his lute with wild abandon, his voice carrying in a bawdy, mocking song about greedy sheriffs and cowardly men. Laughter rippled through the villagers, uneasy but genuine. The sergeant roared for silence, but in that heartbeat of distraction Robin moved. His bow flashed up, and an arrow sang through the air, striking the rope above Edward's head. The rope snapped, the noose falling harmlessly to the ground. Chaos erupted. Much darted forward, cutting Edward's bindings, while Little John barreled into the nearest guards, his staff cracking against armor with the sound of splitting oak. Scarlet appeared like a shadow, his daggers flashing in the torchlight. Robin Hood, someone shouted from the crowd, and the name spread like wildfire. Villagers who moments before stood frozen now surged with sudden courage, pelting the guards with stones and clods of snow. The sheriff's men, outnumbered and overwhelmed, faltered. One by one they fell back, dragging their wounded with them. By the time reinforcements could be called, Robin and his band had vanished into the forest, Edward with them, free and alive. Back in Sherwood, the camp erupted in joy. Thomas flung himself into his father's arms, sobbing with relief. The men laughed and shouted, slapping Edward on the back, their hunger forgotten in the warmth of victory. Even Scarlet, so often bitter, allowed himself a rare smile. That night, as the fire burned high, Friar Tuck raised his cup. This day, a man was saved and a legend born. The people of Locksley will remember. The sheriff thought to frighten them, but instead, he has given them hope. Robin said little, though pride swelled in his chest. He sat with Marion's pendant in his hand, feeling its weight, thinking of what they had begun. One rescue had lit a spark, and sparks, he knew, could set even the mightiest forest ablaze. Sherwood was no longer just a refuge. It was becoming a shield, and Robin Hood was becoming its sword. The snow still clung stubbornly to the branches, but something had shifted in the villages of Nottinghamshire. The rescue of Edward had spread like fire through dry grass. What began as whispers became tavern tales, and within days, every hearth carried the story, how Robin Hood, the outlaw, had struck boldly into Locksley and defied the sheriff's rope. The villagers added details of their own, as stories always do. Some swore Robin loosed an arrow from half a mile away to cut the rope. Others claimed he strode into the square like a ghost, untouchable by blade or arrow. In truth, it had been chaos, close and dangerous, but the tale no longer belonged only to Robin and his band. It belonged to the people. Around the fire in Sherwood, Alan the minstrel played a soft tune, weaving the story into song. His verses spoke of injustice answered, of courage in the face of cruelty, of a hooded figure who stood for the poor when no law would protect them. The men listened in silence at first, then with nods of pride. Even Scarlet, ever cynical, tapped his knife on his knee in time with the rhythm. When the song ended, Much's eyes shone. "They'll sing that in Locksley," he said almost in awe. "Perhaps even in Nottingham itself." "Songs are powerful," Tuck murmured, his round face solemn in the firelight. "They travel farther than arrows, and once loosed they cannot be caught." Robin felt the weight of those words. He had never sought to be a hero. Yet already his name was growing beyond his control, reshaped by the mouths of others. The sheriff would hear those same tales, twisted into accusations, fuel for his rage. That too was a weapon, but a dangerous one. Still, he could not deny the effect. Only days after Edward's rescue, families began to appear at the edge of Sherwood. They did not step fully into the outlaw camp, but they left small gifts: a basket of eggs, a sack of grain, a skin of ale. In return, they carried away stories of the hooded man who defied the sheriff. Robin watched the exchanges from a distance, hidden among the trees. He felt pride but also unease. Each gift was a risk for those villagers. Each story could bring the sheriff's wrath. And yet they came. Hunger had taught him resolve. Now the people's faith taught him something deeper: responsibility. That night, as the band shared a rare feast of bread, cheese, and roasted rabbit, Robin stood. The fire painted his face in shifting gold and shadow. "We've been called thieves," he said, voice steady. "Outlaws, criminals. Perhaps we are all of those. But if we must steal, let us steal back what was taken. If we must fight, let us fight for those who cannot. The people look to us now. We cannot be only men hiding in a forest. We must be more." Little John's deep voice rumbled in agreement. "We'll give them something to believe in." Scarlet smirked, but his eyes gleamed with the same fire. "If we're to be legends, then let's make it a tale worth telling." They clasped hands, one by one, sealing their unspoken vow. From that night forward, the oak leaf became their mark. Painted in green or carved in wood, it was left wherever they struck. On sacks of grain returned to starving families, on the doors of corrupt officials, on the gallows rope cut short. The people came to know the symbol. To see it was to know they were not forgotten, that someone stood against the sheriff. In the weeks that followed, Robin's band moved like shadows. They ambushed tax collectors on forest roads, disarmed soldiers who bullied villagers, and left food at the edge of hamlets where children went hungry. Always they spared lives when they could. Always they left the oak leaf behind. The sheriff raged. He doubled his patrols, posted rewards, and promised the rope to any who spoke Robin Hood's name. Yet the more he hunted, the more the legend grew. And as spring slowly stirred beneath the snow, Robin felt something stir within himself as well. No longer just a man cast out of his home, he was becoming something larger. Something both terrifying and exhilarating. A symbol had awakened in Sherwood, and Robin Hood was its name. Spring crept slowly into Sherwood. Patches of green broke through the gray of winter, and streams once frozen began to sing again. With the thaw came new dangers. Patrols ventured deeper into the forest, following trails left by careless feet. The sheriff's wrath had grown colder than the frost. His men scoured villages, demanding names of those who whispered Robin Hood. It was on such a morning that Friar Tuck returned. Robin found him waiting by the brook, his round figure perched on a mossy rock, staff in hand. His robe was patched but clean, his eyes bright beneath his graying fringe. He looked less like a wandering friar and more like some immovable oak, rooted by faith alone. "Robin." Tuck's voice carried warmly, cutting through the chill. "I thought I might find you here." Robin clasped his hand, smiling despite the weight in his chest. "You risk much coming so deep into Sherwood," Tuck chuckled. "I risk more if I stay in the villages." The sheriff watches priests as closely as peasants. He fears the tongues that tell stories more than swords that draw blood. "But I've brought news and gifts." From within his robe, he produced a small package wrapped in oiled cloth. Robin's heart leapt even before he touched it. Marion's handiwork, a wooden pendant carved into the form of a stag, smooth beneath his calloused fingers. And beneath it, a strip of linen, upon which neat charcoal words read, "We are well. He asks about you. Stay safe." The words struck like an arrow to the heart. For a moment, Robin's throat closed, torn between joy and sorrow. His son remembered him. Marion still thought of him. Even across miles and danger, they remained bound together. "She watches over your boy," Tuck said softly, as if reading his thoughts. "But the sheriff's men watch her too. You must remain apart for now." Robin nodded, swallowing the ache. "Tell her," he faltered, then shook his head. "No. If words must be carried, let them be hers. Mine would only endanger her." They walked back to camp together. The men greeted Tuck with cheers, for the friar was more than a messenger. He was comfort, wisdom, and sometimes a bearer of bread and ale hidden in his pack. He ate with them, laughing, sharing tales of the villages, of how Robin's name had become a shield spoken in hushed defiance. But when the meal ended and the men drifted into their tasks, Tuck's face grew solemn. He beckoned Robin to the fire, leaning on his staff. "The sheriff bleeds the people dry," Tuck said. "Now he has announced a winter tithe, a fifth of every family's store taken before the first snow. He claims it will feed his men. In truth, it will feed his feast. This is no tax, it is cruelty." Robin felt his hands clench. "A fifth of their stores, in winter? That is death for many." "Indeed," Tuck agreed, his eyes narrowing. "And the people look to you. They tell stories of your rescues, of food left at the forest's edge, of arrows loosed in justice. But stories alone cannot fill empty bellies. Robin, you must choose. Remain an outlaw hiding among trees, or become the defender the people already believe you are." Robin stared into the fire. The flames licked upward, fierce, alive, demanding. "You would have me strike at the sheriff openly? Rob his men, take back what he steals?" "I would have you do what justice demands," Tuck replied firmly. "The law has become the sheriff's weapon. But true justice, that lies elsewhere. When the law starves children, to defy it is no sin. It is duty." The words settled over Robin like a mantle heavier than any cloak. He thought of his companions, of Edward and Thomas, of Marion's note. He thought of his own son, learning to draw a bow in Locksley, watched by soldiers who saw only a potential outlaw. "Yes," Robin said at last, his voice steady as the oak trees surrounding them. "If the sheriff takes from the poor, we will take it back. Let him call me thief. I will be a thief for justice." Tuck's eyes crinkled with approval. "Then, Robin Hood, the people shall not starve this winter. And perhaps, when they speak your name, it will no longer be in whispers, but in songs." Robin lifted the stag pendant, pressing it against his heart. For the first time since exile, he felt not only the burden of loss, but the weight of purpose. The sheriff had made him an outlaw. The people were making him a legend. The air in Sherwood had turned sharp again, carrying with it the bite of approaching frost. Smoke from village chimneys curled against the gray sky, but beneath those roofs despair festered. Friar Tuck's warning of the sheriff's winter tithe had not been idle talk. Soon after, Robin's scouts returned with grim confirmation. Soldiers were already moving from hamlet to hamlet, taking 1/5 of every store of grain, beans, dried meat, and root vegetables. It was no tax. It was theft wearing the mask of law. Robin gathered his band around the central fire. The men leaned close, their faces drawn thin from hunger but lit with curiosity and anger. Edward sat with Thomas pressed close against him, while little John, ever steady, leaned on his great staff like an oak rooted into the ground. "The sheriff means to starve the shire this winter," Robin said, his voice carrying low but steady. "If he takes their food, he condemns children to hunger while he feasts in Nottingham. This we cannot allow." Scarlet's eyes burned. "Then we strike. Take back the tithe before it reaches the castle. Bleed the sheriff where it hurts." Much hesitated, glancing toward Edward. "But they'll be ready for us. The soldiers will guard the wagons heavily. If we fail, we don't just lose, We invite his wrath upon every village that whispers our name." Robin considered his words carefully. He saw the same fear flickering in other eyes. "If we do nothing," he countered, "those villages starve regardless. But if we succeed, even once, the people see that the sheriff can be opposed. That his cruelty is not absolute." It was Tuck who gave the final push. He leaned forward, his round face solemn in the firelight. "The people already call you champion, Robin. They already sing of you. If you retreat now, the legend fades to smoke. If you strike, it becomes fire." The decision was made. Plans were laid deep into the night. Scouts described the road between Loxley and Wickham, a narrow stretch where the forest pressed close on either side. There they could conceal themselves in the trees. There they could spring like wolves. 3 days later, as snow began to fall in soft veils, Robin led his band to that very road. They moved in silence, cloaks drawn, bows ready, hearts hammering with both fear and anticipation. Hidden among the oaks, they waited. The crunch of wheels came first, heavy carts, drawn by plow horses laden with sacks and barrels. Around them rode 6 of the sheriff's men, clad in chainmail, swords at their belts, eyes wary. They were not fools. They knew Sherwood belonged to Robin Hood. Robin's heart thudded as the wagons entered the narrow stretch. He stepped from the trees, his hood casting shadow over his face, bow raised but arrow unnotched. "Hold!" his voice rang through the cold air. "These stores belong to the people. You will not take them to Nottingham." The soldiers reined their horses sharply, startled. Recognition dawned in their eyes, followed by hatred. "Robin Hood," the leader snarled. "1 man against 6. You'll hang for this." "Who said I was alone?" Robin answered. At his signal, shadows moved among the trees. Little John, Scarlet, Much, Allen, Edward, all stepping into view, bows drawn, arrows aimed with steady hands. The soldiers froze. They knew the truth. Swords meant nothing against arrows already drawn. The leader's jaw clenched. He spat into the snow. "The sheriff will burn every village in Loxley for this." Robin's voice was cold steel. "No village helped me. Tell him that. Tell him Robin Hood took back what he stole." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then the sergeant raised his hands, signaling surrender. One by one, the soldiers dismounted. Their swords and crossbows were gathered, but their lives were spared. Robin's men bound them securely, leaving them unharmed but humiliated. The wagons were driven into the forest. There, by moonlight, the band divided the stores. Some went directly to Sherwood's camp, but most were carried to the edges of villages. Sacks of grain left at the wood's edge, barrels of beans rolled to cottage doors. Upon each, they left the mark of the oak leaf. By dawn, the shire was buzzing. Families wept over returned food. Children laughed as they gnawed bread. And everywhere, villagers whispered the same name with awe and gratitude: Robin Hood. In Nottingham Castle, the sheriff's rage was thunderous. He struck goblets from the table, swore vengeance, and demanded twice the patrols in Sherwood. Yet for every man he sent, another tale spread, another family survived the winter. And in the forest, Robin's band sat around their fire, exhausted but triumphant. Hunger still gnawed at them, but victory tasted sweeter. For the first time, Robin felt it fully. He was no longer merely a fugitive. He had become the people's defender. The sheriff had stolen their food, their coin, their hope. Robin Hood would steal it back. The sheriff's fury had not cooled. Word spread quickly through the villages. More soldiers on the roads, more wagons of tribute bound for Nottingham. These were not simple carts of grain now. They were guarded convoys, bristling with crossbows and swords. The sheriff meant to send a message. Robin Hood would not humiliate him again. But Robin had learned something from the winter tithe raid. The people believed now. They whispered his name with reverence, passed food tokens in the market, and left messages scratched on trees for his band. With each story told, the legend of the Greenwood grew stronger. And with legend came responsibility. "Another caravan moves tomorrow," Will Scarlet reported as he crouched by the fire, eyes glinting in the low light. 2 wagons heavily guarded. 10 men at arms, 3 with crossbows. They'll pass the Loxley road by midday. Little John frowned, his huge hands folded across his chest. 10 armed men against 7 of us? Those odds are too long. Robin studied the map scratched into the dirt with a stick. The Loxley road narrowed into a ravine at one point, steep banks rising on both sides, the earth hard-packed from centuries of cartwheels. "Here," he said, tapping the ravine. "If we strike, it must be here. The ground favors archers above horsemen. We can block their escape." The plan took shape. Alanadale would play the wandering minstrel, harp slung across his back. At the ravine's mouth, Muchinwell would stage a fake robbery, loud, clumsy, distracting. Meanwhile, Robin, Little John, and two others would lie in wait atop the ravine slopes. When the convoy entered, they would rain arrows down. The chaos would scatter the guards before steel was ever drawn. The next day dawned pale and misted. The forest was hushed, dew dripping from young spring leaves. Robin and his companions took their positions as planned. From his vantage, Robin could see the entire road bend toward the ravine like a funnel. His bow rested in his hand, his heartbeat steady. Hoofbeats approached, measured, heavy. The first sight of them tightened his chest. 10 riders in chainmail, swords at their sides, shields slung across their backs. Between them rumbled 2 great wagons draped in oiled cloth. The diversion began flawlessly. Alan stepped aside, feigning deference as the caravan neared. At that moment, Will and Much burst out, shouting threats, waving weapons. The guards at the front reined their horses sharply, shouting to one another, attention fixed on the supposed ambush. And then the wagons entered the ravine. Robin loosed the signal, a soft bird call. Instantly the trap sprung. Bundles of stones and branches tumbled down behind the convoy, blocking retreat. Arrows whistled from above, striking the ground before the lead horses. They reared in panic, hooves striking the air. The guards cursed, wheeled their mounts, tried to form defense. But the ravine betrayed them. Horses stumbled on the uneven ground. Crossbows raised shakily, but before they could fire, Little John came crashing down the slope, staff whirling like a windmill. He struck one rider full in the chest, unseating him with a crack that echoed off the stone walls. Robin fired deliberately, not to kill but to disable. One arrow sliced across a guard's sword arm, forcing him to drop his blade. Another sank into the wood of a crossbow stock, splitting it apart. His men fought with precision. Slings cracked against helmets, staffs swept riders to the ground, and arrows cut the fight short before it began. Within minutes, the guards were disarmed and bound. Their anger was fierce, but their pride wounded more than their flesh. Robin stepped among them, bow still in hand. "Tell the sheriff," he said coldly, "that Nottingham's luxuries are no longer his to squander. What the people pay in sweat and hunger will not line his feast tables while children starve." The soldiers spat curses, but none dared meet his eyes. They knew, as all the sheriff's men now knew, that Robin Hood was not merely an outlaw. He was a force the law itself could not contain. The wagons were opened, revealing their cargo. Not coin as expected, but luxuries. Bolts of silk, barrels of wine, exotic spices, silver goblets wrapped in straw. The sheriff had taken tribute from his people not to provision soldiers, but to fatten his own household with indulgence. The discovery stoked the fire of Robin's purpose. "We'll take the practical," he ordered. "Fabrics, herbs, tools. These will clothe and feed. The rest will trade. Merchants in York or Lincoln will gladly give coin for luxuries." By twilight, the wagons had been stripped, their goods hidden along secret forest paths. The guards were left tied but unharmed where travelers would soon find them. That night, as the band sat around their fire, Robin felt the weight of Friar Tuck's words. Each raid was more than a victory, it was a message carried by rumor and song into every hearth of Nottinghamshire. The sheriff ruled through fear. But fear could be broken. And with each act of defiance, the people's hope grew bolder. Robin Hood was no longer just a hunted man. He was becoming a legend. The firelight danced across tired faces that night, reflecting triumph but also the weight of what had been done. The wagons of the sheriff's luxuries now lay hidden in secret caches throughout Sherwood. For the villagers, spring would bring relief and hope. For Robin's band, it meant survival, and a growing reputation that spread faster than any patrol. But when Robin stepped away from the laughter and sat alone at the forest's edge, the silence pressed close. Victory could not erase the ache that lived in his chest, the longing for what he had lost, Marion and the son who bore his name but not his presence. He fingered the wooden pendant at his chest, the carving of a stag Marion had once shaped by firelight. Its touch steadied him. He wondered, as he often did, whether she still carved wood to pass the evenings, whether their son had outgrown his first bow. A soft rustle behind him pulled him from his thoughts. He turned, expecting little John or Tuck. But it was neither. A woman stepped into the clearing, her cloak shadowed, her hair catching the firelight in dark waves. For a heartbeat Robin thought it a dream. His breath caught, his hands numb. Marion? Her eyes glistened, holding his with a mix of joy and sorrow. Robin. The name, spoken by her lips after so long, broke something inside him. He crossed the clearing in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. The scent of her, wood smoke, herbs, and something uniquely hers, enveloped him, stronger than memory. For a long moment neither spoke. The world stilled to the beat of their hearts pressed together. When at last they drew apart, Robin searched her face. She was thinner, her cheeks more hollow, lines of worry etched where laughter once lived. Yet her spirit, the fire that had first drawn him to her, still burned in her eyes. "How?" he whispered, afraid to break the fragile miracle. "Friar Tuck," she replied softly. "He came to Locksley. He told me where to find you. He said it was time." Robin gave a short laugh, half relief, half disbelief. The friar, always meddling. Her smile was faint but real. Not meddling. Helping. "He said I needed to see what you've built here, to understand." Robin's voice dropped. "And our son?" "With friends," Marion said firmly. "Safe, watched over. I dared not bring him yet. The sheriff's men still watch the cottage, though less often now. But he's growing strong, Robin. Too strong to keep waiting forever." The knot of fear that had lodged in Robin's chest loosened slightly at her words. His boy was safe. His boy was alive. Yet guilt cut sharp. "He deserves a father at his side," Robin murmured. "And he will have one," Marion answered, her gaze unwavering. "When the time is right. When it's safe. But I had to see you first. To know if the man I loved was still here, or if he had become only the outlaw in the stories." Robin's throat tightened. "I never stopped being that man, Marion. But the world forced me to become more." He gestured toward the campfires where his band laughed and sang. "These people, they depend on me. They've made me into something larger than myself. And I cannot turn from it." Marion's hand touched his cheek, her palm warm against his skin. "I see that now. I came expecting excuses, but instead I see purpose. You're fighting for more than survival. You're fighting for justice." He swallowed hard. "And what of us? What of the life we dreamed of?" Marion's eyes softened. "It may not be the cottage with a garden we imagined, but it can still be a family. I want to be part of this, Robin. Not waiting in Locksley for scraps of news, but here, helping, working, raising our son in the truth of who his father is." For the first time in years, Robin allowed himself hope. Hope not just for victory against the sheriff, but for love returned, for a family reborn in the heart of the Greenwood. "When?" he asked, scarcely daring. "After May Day," she whispered. "There are preparations to make, and Tuck has friends who will help us leave unseen. When the flowers bloom, I will bring him to you." Robin pulled her close again, heart pounding. For the first time since exile, he felt whole. Behind them, the band's voices carried a song, a rough ballad of Robin Hood, the champion of the poor. The legend was already spreading, but Robin scarcely heard it. His world, for this moment, was Marion's heartbeat against his own. In centuries to come, tales would speak of Robin Hood as hero, thief, or warrior. Few would recall the man who, in a quiet Sherwood clearing, held the woman he loved and dared to believe in a future. But for Robin, that was the truth worth fighting for. The legend had begun. But now, it had something more powerful to protect than gold or grain. It had family. And that made Robin Hood unstoppable. Spring unfurled across Sherwood like a long-awaited promise. Buds burst on the ancient oaks, wildflowers carpeted the forest floor, and the air smelled of damp earth and new beginnings. The bitter winter tide was behind them, yet its memory lingered in every village, tied to a single name whispered with reverence and defiance: Robin Hood. Stories spread faster than the sheriff's patrols could ride. In taverns, ballads spoke of an outlaw who robbed wagons in broad daylight and vanished like smoke among the trees. In cottages, mothers soothed their children with tales of the green-clad archer who watched over the poor. By village firesides, men traded ever-growing rumors that Robin could split an arrow in mid-flight, that he could vanish into oak bark, that he had the ear of King Richard himself. Robin listened to these tales with both pride and unease. Around the fire one night, Little John chuckled as he relayed a market gossip. "They say you shot a coin from the sheriff's hand at a mile's distance, Robin." The outlaw leader shook his head, smiling despite himself. "If I could shoot a mile, John, the sheriff would already be headless." The laughter that followed was warm, but Robin's eyes drifted to Friar Tuck, who sat in thoughtful silence. When pressed, the friar spoke simply, "Tails are arrows too, Robin. They fly farther than any bow shot, and they strike in places you may never see. The people believe in you, not just for what you do but for what they think you are." Robin absorbed the words. He knew the truth, that he was still just a man, weary, scarred, often uncertain. Yet the legend growing around his name was larger than flesh and blood. It gave hope to the oppressed, and that hope could be as vital as bread in the harsh months. But with legend came risk. The Sheriff of Nottingham seated in his stone halls, humiliated by every whisper of Robin's defiance. Patrols doubled. Bounties were raised. Mercenaries were hired, men without scruple who cared only for silver and blood. Robin's name inspired the people, but it also painted a target on every man and woman who aided him. The band's camp reflected the change. No longer a handful of outlaws, they had grown into a hidden community. Families who had fled unjust taxes built shelters among the trees. A blacksmith named Simon had erected a small forge, its smoke carefully dispersed to hide their presence. Children ran through the undergrowth, turning Robin's deeds into games of capture and escape. Robin watched it all with a heavy sense of responsibility. These were no longer just comrades in arms, they were people placing their futures in his hands. Marion's visit weeks earlier had only deepened that weight. Her promise to join him after Mayday echoed in his thoughts each dawn. Soon, his family would be part of this forest village. He had to ensure it would endure. One morning, Will Scarlet returned from Nottingham with urgent news. The sheriff prepares another caravan. Not food this time, coin. Tribute gathered from across the shire, meant for York. 2 wagons, guarded by at least a dozen men. The camp murmured. Such a treasure could buy supplies for months, arm the villagers, strengthen their cause. But it was also dangerous beyond measure. 12 guards with crossbows were no small threat. Robin felt the old stirring in his chest, the call of risk, the thrill of striking at the sheriff's pride. Yet Tuck's caution lingered in his mind. The friar's words about legend carried weight. Sometimes the threat of Robin Hood could inspire more than the man himself. That night, Robin walked the quiet perimeter of the camp. The forest hummed with nocturnal life, owls calling, foxes rustling through underbrush. He paused beneath a towering oak, its branches stretching skyward like arms raised in eternal defiance. He pressed his palm to the bark and whispered as though the tree itself could hear, "What am I becoming? A leader? A symbol? Or just another outlaw destined for the gallows?" Behind him, footsteps crunched softly. Marion's voice, calm and steady, answered, "You are becoming the man our son will know as his father. That is enough." Robin turned, startled. She had slipped from the village earlier than promised, risked discovery to return to him. In her eyes was no hesitation, only resolve. And in that moment, Robin realized the truth. The legend was no longer his alone. It belonged to all who believed, all who resisted, all who hoped. Sherwood was no longer a refuge. It was a kingdom of its own, not of crowns and laws, but of defiance and justice. And Robin Hood, willing or not, was its prince. The Sheriff of Nottingham sat in his stone hall, firelight casting jagged shadows across his scarred features. His goblet of wine shook with the force of his grip, and the court around him kept silent. Servants dared not breathe too loudly, soldiers shifted uneasily in their armor. Everyone knew what brewed behind their master's dark eyes: humiliation. Robin Hood's name had become poison in the sheriff's ear. Every tale sung in a tavern was another knife to his pride, every whisper of food left at a cottage door another crack in his authority. He had spent years bending Nottinghamshire to his will, bleeding it dry coin by coin, only to have one outlaw unravel it all with a bow and a smile. "No more," he growled, slamming the goblet against the table. Red wine spilled like blood across the wood. If the people wished to worship a thief, let them pay in flesh for their devotion. At his command, orders were drawn. Patrols would no longer be content to guard roads. They would raid villages suspected of harboring Robin's sympathizers. Whole families would be questioned, beaten, dragged to the castle dungeons if necessary. Fear, the sheriff believed, would silence admiration. fear would crush legend. But he was not finished. From the east, he summoned mercenaries, hardened riders from the borderlands, men who cared nothing for law, only for the silver coin heavy in their purses. They wore no livery of Nottingham, but their cruelty made them a sharper weapon than any knight. "Let Robin face men who fight without honor," the sheriff declared. "Let him bleed in the shadows he calls home." Word of these measures reached Sherwood within days. Villagers who had once whispered Robin's name with pride now came trembling, telling of neighbors dragged from homes, children crying as food stores were smashed, men chained and taken for questioning. Around the campfire, anger boiled. Will Scarlet's fist slammed against his knees. "He punishes the people because he cannot catch us. Every raid we make, they pay the price." Much, usually steady, shook his head in frustration. "And yet if we stop, the sheriff grows bolder still. What are we to do? Strike again and again while our friends suffer?" Robin felt the weight of their eyes. The truth was bitter. Their actions inspired hope, but also provoked wrath. For every loaf of bread returned, the sheriff sought to take two in vengeance. The balance was fragile, and breaking it could doom those they sought to protect. It was Friar Tuck who broke the silence, his voice low but firm. "The sheriff believes only in fear. He does not see that fear cannot root itself in ground where hope has been planted. The more he tightens his grip, the more the people turn to you, Robin. That is why his fury burns so hot." Robin nodded slowly. He knew the friar spoke truth, but it did little to ease the sting. Every child's tear weighed on him. Every punishment carried out in his name gnawed at his conscience. Then Marian spoke. She had been sitting quietly, hands folded, her presence still new among the band. But when her voice came, it was steady and clear. "If fear is his weapon, then we must become the shield. Not just raiding caravans, but defending villages. Not just striking, but standing. Let the people see not only a thief who gives, but a guardian who protects." The camp fell into thoughtful silence. Marian's words struck a chord. To fight was dangerous. To defend, perhaps even more so. But the legend of Robin Hood could not live on raids alone. It had to stand against the sheriff's cruelty directly, where the people could see and believe. The decision came at dawn. Scouts returned with news that mercenaries had been sighted near Wickham, preparing to march into the village to search for traitors. Robin gathered his band. "This ends today," he said. "If the sheriff means to bring his war to the people, then we will meet him there. The villagers will not stand alone." Little John hefted his staff with a grim smile. About time. The band melted into the forest, moving swift and silent toward Wickham. The sheriff had made his move, but Robin would answer in kind. As the sun rose higher, Robin's heart steeled. This was no longer a battle for coin or food. It was for the spirit of Nottinghamshire itself. If the sheriff fought with fear, Robin Hood would answer with defiance. The legend was about to face its greatest trial yet. The village of Wickham sat at the edge of Sherwood, a cluster of thatched roofs and narrow lanes surrounded by fields just beginning to green with spring shoots. It was a poor village, most were these days, but its people were proud. They had whispered Robin's name, sung his praises in secret, and left food for his band when they could spare it. That loyalty now drew the sheriff's wrath. By mid-morning, the mercenaries arrived. 12 men on horseback, armored in mismatched mail and leather, their weapons nicked but well used. They bore no crest of Nottingham, only hard eyes and cruel grins. The villagers scattered at the sight of them, mothers pulling children into cottages, men gripping farm tools they knew were no match for steel. The leader of the band dismounted, his voice a growl. "By order of the sheriff, all houses are to be searched. Any who withhold supplies or aid outlaws will be punished. Resist and you hang." His men spread out, kicking at doors, shoving aside terrified peasants. A young boy cried as one mercenary seized his father by the collar, dragging him into the mud. The villagers stood frozen between fear and fury, powerless to resist. That was when the first arrow struck. It buried itself deep into the wood of the village well, quivering inches from the leader's head. Gasps rang out. The mercenaries spun, scanning the tree line. From the shadows of Sherwood, Robin Hood stepped forward, his bow in hand, Green Hood casting a shadow across his face. "The people of Wickham owe you nothing," he called, voice carrying over the stillness. "If you want to rob and burn, you'll answer to me." The mercenaries sneered, but unease flickered in their eyes. More figures emerged from the trees. Little John with his quarterstaff, Will Scarlet's scarred face glinting with grim resolve, Much with his short sword, Alan with his lute slung aside in favor of a blade. And then Friar Tuck, round but formidable, raising his staff like a shepherd against wolves. The leader barked a laugh. 6 men? Against 12 of us. Robin's bowstring drew back with a hiss, the arrow aimed steady. Who said 6? At that cue more shadows shifted. Villagers, men and women alike, stepped from their homes holding pitchforks, staves and slings. Their fear had not vanished, but Robin's presence had rekindled courage. They were no longer alone. The mercenary spat and drew his sword. Kill him. Kill them all. The fight erupted. The first volley of arrows flew swift and sure. 2 mercenaries fell from their saddles, one clutching an arm, the other pinned to the dirt with an arrow in his thigh. Horses reared, panicked by the sudden assault. Little John surged forward like a storm, his staff cracking against a rider's helm, sending the man tumbling. Will darted in with flashing knives, hamstringing another horse, forcing its rider down into the waiting hands of angry villagers. The mercenaries fought hard, seasoned killers with no loyalty but to coin. One swung a heavy axe at Much, splintering a cart beside him. Another cornered a farmer, blade raised, only for Tuck's staff to crash against his helmet, ringing like a church bell. God forgives, the friar muttered, striking again, but I do not. Robin moved like water, loosing arrow after arrow, each shot disabling without killing. He aimed for arms, for legs, for the joints and armor that would end the fight without spilling unnecessary blood. But when one mercenary raised his blade toward a fleeing child, Robin's arrow struck true, through the man's chest, dropping him instantly. The skirmish raged through the lanes of Wickham, steel clashing with wood, shouts mingling with cries of fear and defiance. Villagers who had once hidden now fought beside Robin's band, throwing stones, jabbing with forks, dragging wounded mercenaries down into the mud. At last, with their numbers halved and their leader bleeding from a cut across his brow, the mercenaries faltered. The survivors mounted their horses and fled, shouting curses, promising the sheriff's vengeance. A cheer rose from Wickham's people, ragged but fierce. Children ran to Robin, clutching his cloak, thanking him through tears. Mothers wept openly, clutching the returned fathers who had nearly been taken. Robin raised his hands, quieting them. "Remember this," he said, voice steady despite his exhaustion. "It was not Robin Hood who saved you. It was your courage. When you stand together, no sheriff, no mercenary, no tyrant can break you. Sherwood stands with you, but you must also stand with each other." The villagers nodded, their fear replaced with something stronger, resolve. As his band gathered, nursing bruises and cuts, Marion appeared from the crowd. She had slipped to Wickham earlier, helping families hide their children when the mercenaries came. Her eyes met Robin's, filled with fierce pride. "You've given them more than food or coin today," she whispered. "You've given them belief." Robin looked over the battered but unbroken village. The sheriff thought fear could keep the Shire in chains. But here in Wickham, he had planted something the sheriff could never uproot. Hope. News of Wickham spread like wildfire. By the week's end, ballads were already being sung about how Robin Hood and his merry men drove off mercenaries and stood as protectors of the poor. To the villagers, it was proof that the sheriff's reach could be broken. To the sheriff himself, it was an unforgivable insult. In Nottingham Castle, the sheriff paced before the long hearth, his boots striking the stone floor in sharp rhythm. Beside him, his advisor, a lean fox-eyed man named Geoffrey of Doncaster, watched with a smirk. "They cheer him as a savior now," Geoffrey said softly. "Every raid, every defense, the people weave his name tighter into their hearts. He has become more than a man, my lord. He is a legend." The sheriff's lips curled into a snarl. "Then I will shatter the legend. Not by hunting him in the forest like a phantom. No, we will use his own pride against him." Geoffrey's brow arched. "A trap then?" The sheriff stopped pacing. "Yes. One baited with the very thing he cannot resist, the suffering of his precious villagers." He slammed his fist onto the table. "Spread word of a great tax caravan leaving York for Nottingham. 2 wagons filled with coin. Guarded, yes, but not beyond what Robin might dare challenge. Make certain the rumor reaches the ears of his spies. He will come, Geoffrey. He cannot help himself." "But the wagons?" Geoffrey asked carefully. The sheriff smiled, thin and cruel.
Empty.
Nothing but stones and straw beneath their tarps. The true caravan will travel another route, heavy with gold. Robin and his fools will spring upon shadows, and find themselves surrounded by my men, archers and horsemen waiting in ambush. Let the people sing his name when he hangs in the square. The plan was set in motion. Messengers carried whispers into taverns and marketplaces. 2 wagons laden with silver bound for Nottingham, they murmured. Enough to feed every village in the Shire. The rumor spread as the sheriff intended, and soon it reached the ears of Alanadale, who hurried with the news to Sherwood. That night, the band gathered around the fire as Alan recounted every detail. Will Scarlet's eyes blazed with excitement. 2 wagons of silver? If we took it, we could buy weapons, food for years, even bribe men to our cause. Much nodded eagerly. We could make the sheriff kneel. But Robin did not share their enthusiasm. He leaned back, eyes narrowed, fingers drumming on his bow. Something felt wrong. Too neat. Too convenient. Think, he said at last. The sheriff has not grown weaker with each defeat. He has grown angrier. He knows the people speak of us as heroes. Do you think he would risk another caravan of silver without laying a trap? The band fell into uneasy silence. Little John rumbled, "So we leave it then? Let him carry the coin unchallenged?" Robin shook his head slowly. "No. If we do nothing, the sheriff grows richer and the people despair. But if we spring his trap blindly, we risk everything. We must be cleverer than him." It was Friar Tuck who leaned forward, his round face gleaming in the firelight. "A trap, yes. But even traps can be turned. If the wagons are false, let us make them truly false. Let us seize them not for silver but for proof. Proof to show the people how their sheriff deceives them, using them as pawns to lure you out. If they see his lies exposed, their faith in him crumbles further." Robin's eyes lit with sudden understanding. "Yes. If we cannot take his silver, we will take his deception. We will strike not for gold but for truth." The plan took form. Scouts would watch the roads for signs of ambush. The band would strike swiftly, not to plunder, but to unmask the sheriff's deceit. Then, through ballad and rumor, the truth would spread faster than any coin could buy. As dawn broke, Robin stood at the forest's edge, watching mist coil through the trees. The sheriff thought he had baited his snare well. But a legend was not so easily trapped. Sherwood would answer. Not just with arrows, but with a story sharper than any blade. The road south of York was quiet, the kind of stillness that came before either rain or blood. The forest pressed close, the air damp with spring mist. From his vantage point on a rise above the road, Robin watched the approaching convoy. 2 wagons, just as Alan's rumor had described. They creaked under tarps, guarded by 8 men in the sheriff's livery. At first glance, it looked exactly like the prize so many dreamed of, treasure enough to shake Nottingham itself. And yet, to Robin's eyes, it looked too perfect. The guards sat straight in their saddles, their eyes scanning but not weary. No muttered complaints, no slouching shoulders from men who had ridden too long. They were alert, almost rehearsed. "Too neat," Robin murmured. Little John shifted beside him, hand tightening on his staff. "It smells of bait, as you said. But bait is still food, if we're clever enough to take it without being hooked." Robin gave a thin smile. "Then let's take the trap itself. Show the people what their sheriff feeds them." The band was ready. Will Scarlet and Much waited on the left ridge, bows drawn. Alanadale and Tuck crouched in brush to the right, prepared to close the road. Robin himself stood in shadow, arrow notched, eyes never leaving the wagons. At his signal, the forest erupted. Arrows whistled down, thudding into wagon wheels, quivering in the dirt before the horses. Shouts of alarm rose from the guards. One tried to raise a horn, only for Little John's staff to swing from the trees, knocking it from his hand. "Hold!" Robin's voice carried like steel across the road. He stepped from concealment, bow drawn to full length. "Lay down your arms. No blood need be shed." The guards hesitated. They had expected an attack, but the sight of Robin Hood himself, green-clad, tall, bow steady, carried more weight than any rumor. Slowly, grudgingly, they dropped their swords. The wagons were seized. Horses calmed. Will and Much bound the guards with practiced efficiency. Then, at Robin's nod, Little John pulled back the tarps. Not silver, not gold, not even food. Stones, sacks of sand, bundles of straw. A murmur of disgust rippled through the band. Will spat on the ground. Clever bastard. He wanted us to risk everything for this. Friar Tuck bent, lifting a stone in both hands. He wanted more than that, the friar said grimly. He wanted us to take this bait, then bleed when his ambush closed. Look. He gestured toward the tree line beyond the road. At first Robin saw nothing. Then, faint movement, a flash of mail, the glint of sunlight on steel. He swore under his breath. The sheriff's men were there, archers hidden in the brush, waiting for Robin to drive the wagons further down the road, deeper into their trap. But Robin had seen enough. Cut them free, he ordered, pointing to the captured guards. Leave them bound but unharmed. Let them carry word back that Robin Hood does not take stones for gold. Much frowned. We leave the wagons? Robin's eyes glinted. No. We leave them as they are, but marked. He pulled a small knife from his belt and carved into the wooden side of one wagon, a hooded figure beneath an oak. A simple emblem one already whispered about in villages. Proof for those who would see. By the time the hidden ambushers realized something was wrong, the forest was already swallowing Robin's band. No pursuit dared enter Sherwood. The wagons remained on the road, tarps pulled back to reveal the sheriff's deceit for any passerby to see. And passers-by did come. Farmers, traders, travelers who would carry the tale. By nightfall, taverns buzzed with laughter. The sheriff had tried to trick Robin Hood, and it was he who had been mocked instead. His wagons, filled with straw and stone, stood as monuments to his failure. That night in camp, the band sat around their fire, the tension of the ambush slowly giving way to relief. Will Scarlet shook his head, grinning despite himself. He meant to shame us. Instead he shamed himself. I almost pity him. Almost, Little John rumbled. Robin sat apart, the firelight flickering across his thoughtful face. He knew this battle had been more than arrows and wagons. It had been for the story itself. The sheriff had tried to twist Robin into a fool. Instead, Robin had turned the tale back upon him, and now the people would laugh at Nottingham's lord while praising Sherwood's outlaw. The friar's words echoed in his mind. Tales are arrows too, and they fly farther than any bowshot. Tonight, the sheriff's arrow had missed. Robin's had struck true. But in the silence between laughter and song, Robin felt the weight of what was coming. The sheriff would not stop. The traps would grow sharper. And one day Robin's luck might falter. He closed his eyes, hand resting on the stag pendant Marion had given him. For now they had won, not with silver but with truth. Tomorrow the fight would begin again. The great hall of Nottingham Castle echoed with the sheriff's rage. Torches flickered in their sconces as his voice rose, carrying down the cold stone corridors. Servants flattened themselves against the walls. Guards exchanged wary glances but dared not move. None wanted to catch the brunt of his fury. On the long oak table lay one of the wagon's tarps, dragged back from the failed trap. Scratched into its wood in bold strokes was Robin's mocking symbol, a hooded figure beneath an oak. The mark was burned into the sheriff's pride far deeper than the carving itself. Stones, the sheriff roared, overturning his goblet so wine splashed across the floor like blood. He leaves me stones and laughter. The peasants mock me in my own markets, Geoffrey. They mock me. His advisor Geoffrey of Doncaster, ever calm, inclined his head. The tale has indeed spread quickly. Already, balladeers sing of Robin turning your cleverness into folly. They say you paid men to guard sacks of dirt. The sheriff's hand twitched toward his dagger, but he forced it down. I will not be the jester in this play. He leaned forward, eyes gleaming with dangerous resolve. If fear alone cannot break their faith, then we strike deeper. We make the cost of defiance unbearable. What do you propose, my lord? Geoffrey asked cautiously. The sheriff's smile was thin and venomous. Burn the villages nearest Sherwood. Wickham, Edwinstowe, even Locksley if need be. Let the people watch their cottages burn for their outlaw's sake. When they know Robin Hood brings fire and death upon them, they will curse his name, not sing it. Geoffrey hesitated. Such measures may rouse rebellion rather than obedience. Then let them rebel, the sheriff snarled. Rebellion gives me cause to call in the crown's troops, to root out this pestilence once and for all. Either way Robin loses. Either his legend collapses or his forest burns with him in it. Orders were sent before the night was over. Riders carried sealed commands to outlying garrisons. By dawn, columns of soldiers marched from the castle. their torches and axes gleaming in the pale light. The people who once feared only taxes now whispered of fire. Meanwhile, in Sherwood, Robin felt the storm brewing before scouts returned with news. He had sensed it in the silence of the forest, in the way animals stirred restlessly, as though they too felt danger on the wind. When Alan and Much came back breathless, reporting villages under threat, the camp erupted in alarm. "They mean to burn us out," Much said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Already I saw smoke to the east. They'll torch Wickham by nightfall if we don't stop them." The villagers who had taken refuge in Sherwood cried out in terror. Mary clutched her children close, eyes wide. The blacksmith Simon cursed under his breath, fists tightening. Robin raised his hand for silence. His own anger burned hot, but his voice was steady. "This is the sheriff's play. He cannot beat us on the road, so he turns his fury on the innocent. He wants the people to believe we bring them ruin. We will not let him succeed." Little John growled. "Then we fight. Head on if we must." Robin shook his head. "Not blindly. If we scatter to defend every village, he'll crush us one by one. We must strike where it matters most, at his fire before it spreads." He looked to Tuck, who met his gaze with grim understanding. "We cannot save every home. But if we save the heart, the rest will hold." That night, as the camp prepared, Marion came to Robin's side. Her face was pale but resolute. "He will not stop until he has broken you," she said softly. Robin touched the stag pendant at his chest, feeling its familiar weight. "Then let him come. He may strike with fear, but I'll answer with hope. And hope burns brighter than fire." As dawn approached, Robin's band slipped through the forest, moving like shadows between trees. Ahead in the valley, the glow of torches grew brighter, the sheriff's men ready to torch Wickham to ash. The sheriff thought wrath would silence the people. But Robin intended to turn that wrath against him. The trap was set. The defense of Wickham had been only the beginning. This time it would be fire against fire. The valley below Wickham glowed with the cruel shimmer of torchlight. From the ridge above, Robin and his band watched as soldiers assembled in grim formation, each man carrying a brand soaked in pitch. The sheriff's orders were plain: burn the village, root out hope by fire. Robin crouched low, eyes narrowing as he surveyed the scene. A column of 30 soldiers stood ready, their commander barking orders, his voice carrying up the slope. The villagers had already fled, many hidden in Sherwood under Marion's care, but their homes, their lives' work, stood vulnerable. Will Scarlet spat into the dirt beside him. 30 men, torches in hand. If we strike too late, Wickham's nothing but cinders. If we strike too soon, we're swallowed whole. Little John gripped his staff, jaw clenched. Then we strike now. Robin shook his head. Not with force alone. Fire spreads faster than arrows. We need to break their will before the first torch is cast. His gaze shifted to Alan Adale, who carried his lute slung over his shoulder even now. Songs move hearts, Alan. But tonight we need something stronger than music. We need spectacle. Alan grinned, catching Robin's intent. A trick then? Robin's eyes glinted in the firelight. A trick to make fear turn against them. The plan unfolded swiftly. Much and Will would circle to the south, blocking retreat with fire of their own, controlled torches lit to frighten but not to spread. Little John and Simon the blacksmith would flank east, creating the illusion of numbers by striking shields and shouting. Meanwhile, Robin and Alan would walk boldly into the valley, cloaked in shadow and legend. As the soldiers prepared to march, Robin stepped from the tree line. His bow was unstrung, but the hood over his face carried more weight than steel. Beside him, Alan plucked a haunting chord on his lute, the melody rising eerie and defiant into the night. "Halt!" Robin's voice rang clear. "Sherwood forbids this fire." The commander froze, startled by the sudden appearance. His men faltered, muttering, their torches wavering. Every soldier in Nottinghamshire had heard the stories. Many believed them. Seeing Robin Hood stride from the darkness, tall and unflinching, was enough to plant doubt in their hearts. "Kill him," the commander barked. "End this farce." But before swords could be drawn, the forest itself seemed to answer. From the southern ridge, flames flared, Much and Will's torches blazing against the night. To the east, a roar rose as Little John bellowed, striking wood upon wood, the sound magnified by the valley walls. Shadows of men flickered on the ridges, multiplied by the fire, giving the illusion of an army descending. Panic rippled through the ranks. "He's surrounded us," one soldier cried. "The whole forest is with him." Robin raised his hand, voice calm but thunderous. "The sheriff sends you to burn homes, to scorch fields, to leave children in ashes. Look around you. This valley is Sherwood. The trees stand with me, the fire turns against you. Drop your torches, or the forest itself will consume you." It was part bluff, part truth. But in the minds of men already shaken by Robin's legend, it was enough. One by one, torches clattered to the ground, their flames sputtering in the damp grass. The commander raged, but fear moved faster than his threats. His soldiers stumbled back, muttering prayers, scattering toward the road. Robin lowered his hand, tension easing from his shoulders. Wickham's cottages still stood, their thatch untouched by fire. The night was saved. Yet as the last soldier fled, Robin's triumph was tempered by unease. He had not loosed a single arrow, and still 30 men had broken like twigs. The legend had won the battle, not the man. Friar Tuck's words echoed in his mind, "Tails are arrows too." When his band rejoined him, laughter and relief surged. Little John clapped Robin's shoulder with a booming laugh. "You didn't just scare them, Robin. You made them believe the whole forest fights at your side." Alan plucked another jaunty cord. "And perhaps it does." Robin forced a smile, though his thoughts remained heavy. "Tonight we turned fire aside. But the sheriff's wrath burns hotter than ever. He will not rest until Sherwood itself is ash." From the ridge, Robin looked out over the valley. The moon cast silver light on the unburned roofs of Wickham, a fragile piece in the shadow of tyranny. Tonight had proven that the sheriff's greatest weapon, fear, could be broken. But Robin knew each victory carried a cost. The fire was turned back this night. Tomorrow it might not be so easily contained. The morning after Wickham's narrow salvation, mist clung to the fields, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and smoke from the soldiers' abandoned torches. The cottages still stood, intact but fragile reminders of what could have been lost. For the villagers, it was proof. Robin Hood was no longer only a thief who struck from the shadows. He had become a shield. Word spread faster than hoofbeats. By noon, travelers carried the tale to Edwinstowe, and by sunset, it was sung in Mansfield taverns. Robin Hood turned fire itself against the sheriff. The balladeers claimed, their verses embroidered with exaggeration. Some said the forest came alive, trees bending to smother flames. Others swore ghostly archers had risen from the mist. The details shifted with each telling, but the heart of the story never changed. Robin Hood had saved Wickham. In Sherwood, Robin's camp buzzed with restless energy. Families who had fled burned or threatened villages now looked to him not just for food, but for protection. A blacksmith, displaced by taxes, set up his forge more firmly. Hunters brought back venison with pride, claiming they now hunted for the cause. Children played at ambushes, pretending to string invisible bows. Marion watched the scene with quiet amazement. "Do you see what you've done?" she said softly to Robin as they stood at the camp's edge. "They're not just surviving anymore. They're building something, a community, a movement." Robin frowned, though her words stirred a flicker of pride. Movements draw enemies as well as friends. The sheriff won't rest. He'll redouble his fury. "And the people will stand taller with every strike he makes," Marion countered. Her eyes held his steadily. "You've given them hope, Robin. That grows faster than fear." Her words proved true in the days that followed. Villagers began to act on their own, small acts of defiance that echoed Robin's cause. Tax collectors arrived at cottages only to find stores mysteriously empty, families claiming they had already given. Outlying patrols found themselves misled by shepherds, who sent them down false paths into bogs or bramble-choked gullies. Even the sheriff's own messengers reported trouble. Letters lost, orders arriving late or not at all, thanks to peasants who forgot the way. Each act was small, but together they rippled like stones cast into a pond. The sheriff felt the currents tightening around him, though he could not yet see their source. One evening, Robin gathered his band by the central fire. Little John leaned forward, brow furrowed. "Word is spreading, but words don't stop swords. Sooner or later, the sheriff will send a true army against us. Then what?" Robin let the fire's crackle fill the silence before he answered. "Then we give the people more than words. We give them a reason to fight for themselves. We're too few to face an army head-on, but if the villages stand with us, if every man and woman resists in their own way, no army can stamp them all out." Friar Tuck's round face glowed in the firelight as he nodded. "The sheriff rules by fear. Fear is strongest when people believe they stand alone. But Robin Hood has shown them they are not alone. That truth is a greater weapon than any bow." It was Marian, though, who gave the final vision. She rose, her cloak catching the glow of the flames. "Then let us make it clear. Sherwood is not just a refuge. It is a beacon. A place where law is twisted into justice, where the weak find strength. If the sheriff burns villages, let the villagers know Sherwood will take them in. If he steals their grain, let them know Sherwood will return it. If he threatens them with fear, let them know Sherwood answers with defiance." The band murmured agreement. The idea was bold, perhaps reckless, but its truth could not be denied. They were no longer a handful of outlaws. They were the roots of something larger, rebellion. Robin looked around the fire at the faces turned toward him. John's unwavering loyalty, Scarlett's restless fire, Much's quiet determination, Alan's grin, Tuck's steady wisdom, Marian's fierce resolve. Behind them, the villagers, farmers, blacksmiths, mothers with children, all waiting, all believing. For the first time, Robin let himself feel it fully. This was no longer just his fight. Sherwood itself was rising. And the sheriff, for all his cruelty, had sown the seeds of his own undoing. The rebellion had begun, not with swords clashing on stone, but with whispers, with courage, with hope spreading from village to village. Hope that bore the name of Robin Hood. Nottingham Castle loomed darker than ever, its walls echoing with the sheriff's restless stride. He could feel the ground shifting beneath his rule. Each week brought fresh humiliations. Another caravan intercepted, another village defiant, another tale of Robin Hood passed from lips to lips like a prayer. The rebellion was not yet open war, but its roots ran deep. Farmers lied to tax collectors. Traders smuggled food into Sherwood. Even the sheriff's own soldiers returned from patrol with eyes shadowed by doubt, whispering of Robin's arrows striking true from nowhere, of villagers sheltering him with silent loyalty. The sheriff slammed his fists onto the council table. "I will not watch my shire slip into the hands of peasants and thieves." Geoffrey of Doncaster, ever smooth, raised a brow. "The noose tightens, my lord. But perhaps the answer is not more soldiers. Perhaps it is one decisive stroke. A gamble, yes, but one that could end Robin's legend in a single blow." The sheriff leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Speak." Geoffrey spread a parchment across the table. On it was sketched Nottingham Fair, the great midsummer gathering where merchants, nobles, and peasants alike crowded the market square. The fair draws every soul from miles around. Robin Hood will not resist such an opportunity. Too much food, too much coin, too much spectacle. He will strike, my lord. And when he does, we will be ready. The sheriff's smile was slow and venomous. An ambush at the fair. Archers in the towers, men disguised among the stalls, hidden chains to block escape. He will come for the sheriff's purse and leave with a rope around his neck. Not just him, Geoffrey added. His followers too. A clean sweep. Cut off the head and the body dies. The sheriff considered, then gave a sharp nod. So be it. Spread word that taxes will be collected at the fair, loudly, carelessly. Robin's spies will carry it back to him. And when he comes to play the hero, Nottingham will become his gallows. In Sherwood, the rumor reached camp within days. Alan Adale returned from town with eager eyes. The sheriff grows careless. He means to collect the fair's taxes in open square, all at once. 2 strong boxes, heavy with coin, guarded only by a few men. It's the chance of a lifetime. Excitement flared among the band. Will Scarlett slapped Much's shoulder. Think of it, a haul enough to arm 100 men. Enough to feed the shire through winter. We'd bleed the sheriff's coffers dry. But Robin's brow furrowed. He stared into the fire, silent. The more he turned it over in his mind, the more it stank of Geoffrey's cunning. Too perfect, too tempting. It's bait, Robin said finally. The laughter stilled. The sheriff knows our ways. He knows we strike where coin is taken. Why would he leave such treasure exposed? Scarlett bristled. So we cower in the woods, then? Let him fatten his purse while we starve? No, Robin said, his voice firm. But neither do we leap blind into his snare. If we strike, it will be on our terms. He looked to Marian, who stood listening at the edge of the firelight. The sheriff thinks legend makes us reckless. We must prove him wrong. Marion's gaze was steady. Then make his trap your stage. If he wants to expose you, expose him instead. Show the people who truly bleeds them. Robin's eyes glinted. The sheriff wanted a spectacle. Robin would give him one, but not the one he expected. At Nottingham Castle, preparations for the fair intensified. Carpenters reinforced the square with hidden barriers. Soldiers drilled in disguise, ready to shed merchant cloaks for swords at a signal. Archers filled the towers, their quivers heavy. The sheriff stood on the balcony above it all, watching with grim satisfaction. This time, he murmured, the outlaw plays the fool. And Sherwood burns with him. Yet even as he spoke, Robin Hood's band was already planning their counterstroke, weaving a scheme not of theft alone but of revelation, to turn the sheriff's gamble into his greatest humiliation. The midsummer fair would decide more than coin. It would decide the fate of a legend. The midsummer sun rose bright over Nottingham, gilding the castle towers and spilling warmth across the sprawling fairground. Merchants from York, Lincoln, and even as far as London crowded the square with colorful stalls. Bright banners fluttered, musicians played lively tunes, and the air was thick with the mingled smells of roasting meat, fresh bread, and spilled ale. But beneath the cheer lingered unease. Villagers knew the sheriff's hand lay heavy on the fare. Every purse would be lightened, every coin counted and carried into his coffers. His tax collectors moved openly among the stalls, strong boxes already filling with silver. At the center of it all, the sheriff sat on a raised dais, clothed in black velvet despite the heat. His eyes swept the crowd with a predator's patience. Around him, disguised soldiers lingered in plain garb, merchants with two straight backs, beggars whose hands were calloused from sword hilts, jugglers who never laughed. From the towers above, archers stood ready, their strings taut. The trap was set. All that remained was for Robin Hood to step into it. Far from the square, in the shelter of Sherwood, Robin tightened his hood and looked over his band. "This is no simple raid," he said, voice low but steady. "The sheriff waits for us. He thinks he will make a spectacle of Robin Hood." His eyes swept across the familiar faces, Little John, Will Scarlet, Much, Allen, Friar Tuck, and Marion. "But today, it is we who will make the spectacle." Marion's eyes glinted with resolve. "We show the people the truth, that their sheriff robs them openly while you return what is theirs. Let them see him unmasked." Robin nodded. "We strike not with blood, but with shame. If the people laugh at him, his power crumbles faster than any army could break it." The plan was bold, reckless, and dangerous, but the band knew no other way. With disguises of merchants and travelers, they slipped into Nottingham with the morning crowds. Robin himself wore a hood of plain brown wool, his bow wrapped in cloth to look like a bundle of wares. The fair bustled as they entered. Children darted between stalls, chasing ribbons. Jugglers tossed knives high into the air. Merchants shouted their wares in competing cries. Amid the noise, the sheriff's men stalked like wolves in sheep's clothing, eyes sharp. Allen set his lute to hand and began to strum a tune near the tax tables. At first it was a simple ballad, but soon his words turned sharper, weaving sly verses of the sheriff's greed. Crowds gathered, laughing nervously at the daring song. The sheriff's jaw clenched on the dais. He could not silence the music without drawing suspicion. Meanwhile, Much and Will drifted toward the strong boxes, marked with the sheriff's seal. They tipped barrels, stumbled like drunkards, distracting the guards long enough for Little John to wedge a length of timber beneath one box. With a grunt of strength, he lifted it onto a cart. To the crowd, it looked like part of the bustle, but whispers began as the boldness of the act sank in. "Is that Robin Hood?" someone whispered. Impossible, he'd never dare the fair. And then the signal came. Robin leapt onto a table in full view of the square, throwing back his hood. The green tunic beneath gleamed like an oath in the sunlight. Bow in hand, he cried out, "Good people of Nottingham, look well at your sheriff. He fattens his purse with your sweat and hunger while you scrape for crumbs. These strong boxes are filled with your coin, taken by law but stolen in truth. Today it returns to you." A roar went up from the crowd, half shock, half exhilaration. The sheriff surged to his feet, shouting orders. Soldiers dropped their disguises, swords flashing. Archers raised bows from the towers. The trap had sprung. But Robin had planned for this. Will Scarlet appended a cask of flour into the air, a white cloud blinding the first wave of guards. Alan struck a triumphant chord, his song rising to a shout the crowd took up. Robin Hood! Robin Hood! In the chaos, Robin's band split the strongboxes, flinging coins into the air. Silver rained across the square, clattering on cobblestones, spilling into the hands of astonished villagers. Laughter erupted, wild and uncontainable. Children scrambled to gather coins. Men raised their fists, women cheered. The sheriff howled, his face crimson. Shoot him. Shoot them all. Arrows hissed from the towers, but Robin's band melted into the crowd, shields of flesh and loyalty all around them. Villagers surged forward, blocking soldiers, shoving guards aside, covering Robin's retreat with their own bodies. The sheriff's ambush had failed. Instead of spectacle, he had birthed a carnival of defiance. Coins scattered like seeds of rebellion, and Robin's name thundered from every throat. By the time Robin and his band slipped back into Sherwood, Nottingham still rang with chants. The sheriff's gamble had cost him dearly. He had meant to end a legend. Instead, he had fed it until it blazed brighter than ever. The aftermath of the Nottingham Fair echoed far beyond the castle walls. Word spread faster than any writer could carry it. Not just that Robin Hood had defied the sheriff in his own stronghold, but that the people themselves had stood with him. Farmers, bakers, tanners, and even children had blocked soldiers, hidden outlaws, and shouted Robin's name until the sheriff's voice was drowned beneath a tide of defiance. By the next morning, villages across the shire were buzzing. At the alehouse in Edwinstow, men whispered that they had seen the sheriff's face red with fury while silver coins clattered at his feet. In Locksley, women swore that Robin himself had pressed bread into their hands, though it had been dropped by Much and Allen. Every tale grew taller with each telling, but the truth remained. For the first time, the sheriff had been made to look powerless before his own people. And that knowledge was a spark in dry grass. In Sherwood Camp, Robin listened as new arrivals poured in, families fleeing not just taxation but retaliation. The sheriff's men scour the roads, one farmer explained, but the people hide us, pass us from house to house. They say the Greenwood is safe. They say Robin Hood protects his own. Robin glanced at Marion, who had been helping the women settle. There was pride in her eyes, but also worry. The camp grows too fast, she murmured later when they sat apart. We'll need more food, more shelter. The sheriff will not let this pass. He will strike harder, Robin agreed, his hand unconsciously brushing the stag pendant against his chest. But harder blows only drive the people closer to us. They know now what power they hold when they stand together. That unity soon showed itself in ways Robin had never imagined. When the sheriff sent collectors to Rufford to seize grain, villagers rang the church bells in alarm. By the time his soldiers arrived, the streets were empty, barns bare. The food had been carted into the forest, hidden in caches dug beneath ancient oaks. When the soldiers demanded answers, the villagers feigned ignorance, their eyes bright with secret defiance. In another hamlet, a band of boys no older than 12 ambushed a patrol, pelting them with stones from slings until the humiliated men fled. Hoodlinks, the sheriff spat when he heard the tale, but the name stuck, proudly adopted by children across the shire. Even the church could not stay neutral. While the bishops still dined at the sheriff's table, village priests quietly blessed Robin's cause from the pulpit. God sees the poor, they reminded their congregations. And God despises the unjust steward who feasts while his flock starves. Friar Tuck returned from his rounds with news of secret gatherings. Farmers meeting by moonlight to pledge loyalty. Women spinning tales of Robin Hood around hearthfires, telling their children that justice had a champion in the Greenwood. The sheriff's writ still held on parchment, but in the hearts of the people, it was Robin's law they honored. The sheriff of course raged. His punishments grew harsher. Whole villages were fined when even a single family was suspected of aiding the outlaws. Homes were burned, fields trampled under horse hooves. Yet the harsher his hand, the more defiant the people became. In Locksley, when a soldier tried to seize a farmer's ox, women beat him back with broom handles. In Worksop, merchants refused to sell to the sheriff's garrison, claiming their goods had mysteriously vanished. Everywhere Robin's leaf mark appeared, painted on doors, carved into trees, even sewn into clothing, a silent declaration of allegiance. Robin himself began to notice a change. When his band struck caravans, villagers appeared afterward, not merely grateful but organized, helping to distribute the goods, hiding the horses, even creating decoys to lead pursuers astray. It was no longer Robin and his band against the sheriff. It was the people themselves rising, 1,000 unseen hands shaping the struggle. One evening, as the band gathered round the fire, Will Scarlet voiced what they all sensed. "We are no longer just outlaws," he said, his scarred face lit by the flames. "We are the heart of a rebellion." The word hung in the air, dangerous, treasonous. Robin felt its weight. To defy the sheriff was one thing. To defy the crown's authority, even through its corrupt steward, was another. But then he thought of Marion's words, of his son's small bow in Locksley, of hungry faces smiling as coins rained into their hands. "If rebellion is to demand justice," Robin said slowly, "then yes. Let them call us rebels. Better that than to kneel while good men starve." A murmur of agreement rippled through the band. Even Friar Tuck, who had often urged caution, lifted his mug. "Then let it be rebellion," he said solemnly. "For no law that denies mercy deserves obedience." The camp erupted in cheers. Beneath the summer stars, the oath of rebellion was sealed not by parchment, but by shared purpose and defiance. The sheriff might have his castle, his soldiers, and his king's seal. But the people had something far stronger: hope. Hope that the poor could rise, that the cruel could be humbled, that justice could live in the Greenwood. The uprising had begun. The summer of rebellion could not last forever. For weeks, the sheriff endured humiliation after humiliation. Caravans stripped, collectors mocked, his soldiers driven back by peasants with slings and scythes. Nottingham itself whispered of Robin Hood more than it did of its sheriff. The outlaw had become a shadow king of Sherwood. His word carried farther than any proclamation sealed with wax. The sheriff's pride festered until it turned to desperation. "Enough," he declared to his captains, slamming a jeweled goblet onto the table in his hall. "This outlaw thinks himself my equal. He thinks these swine are his people. Very well. Let the people see him hang. I will smoke him out of Sherwood if I must burn the forest itself." Word of his vow reached the camp within days. Scouts reported hundreds of men assembling, not just soldiers from Nottingham but mercenaries lured with silver. Axes, torches, and carts of oil stood ready. The sheriff meant to scour Sherwood clean. That night, the campfire burned low as Robin's band gathered in grim silence. Faces were taut with fear and resolve. Marion sat close beside Robin, her hand entwined with his. Little John's great fists clenched and unclenched as if already striking. Friar Tuck lifted his gaze from the fire and said, "If we flee, we lose all we've built. If we fight, we may fall. But either way, the legend endures." Robin nodded slowly. "This forest gave us refuge. It became our home, our fortress, our kingdom. If the sheriff comes with fire, then we will show him that Sherwood does not burn quietly. We will meet him here." At dawn, the sheriff's army entered the Greenwood. Hundreds of boots trampled the ferns. Torches blazed in the daylight, dripping oil onto dry bark. The sheriff himself rode at the head, face grim beneath his velvet hood. But Sherwood had its own defenses. Paths narrowed where archers waited unseen. Snares tightened around charging horses. Deadfall traps of logs and stones collapsed with devastating force. The sheriff's numbers worked against him. In the twisting forest, tight ranks became chaos. Shouts tangled into confusion. Robin's band struck like phantoms. Arrows hissed through the trees, each one felling a torchbearer before fire could reach the underbrush. Little John crashed from the branches above with his quarterstaff, scattering mercenaries like children. Marion, bow in hand, loosed shaft after shaft, her aim steady as the beat of her heart. But still the sheriff pressed forward, driving his men deeper. "Find him," he roared. "Bring me Robin Hood's head." The final clash came in a clearing known as the Greenwood's Heart, where oaks older than kingdoms rose like pillars of a cathedral. There Robin stood openly, his band arrayed at his side. "Sheriff of Nottingham." Robin's voice rang clear, carrying across the tumult. "You come with fire and sword against your own people. You call us outlaws, but it is you who steals, you who starves the poor. Your law is no law, only tyranny." The sheriff sneered. "Fine words for a thief. You hide in the trees, but today you meet me as a man." He drew his sword, the steel gleaming cruelly. Robin lifted his bow in answer. "I meet you as a man of Sherwood, sworn to defend those you oppress." The two forces crashed together. Blades rang, arrows sang, cries echoed through the ancient trees. The sheriff fought like a man possessed, his fury lending him strength. Twice he nearly reached Robin, only to be driven back by Little John's staff or Marion's deadly arrows. At last Robin faced him alone. The sheriff's blade slashed, but Robin ducked, driving an arrow point into the man's shoulder. With a howl, the sheriff stumbled. Robin knocked a final arrow, aimed not at the man's heart but at the torch in his hand. The shaft struck true, sending the flame tumbling into the dirt. The forest roared with the people's voices. Villagers had come, armed with pitchforks, scythes, and sheer defiance. They surged into the clearing, surrounding the sheriff's battered men. Outnumbered and demoralized, the soldiers broke and fled, dragging their wounded master with them. By nightfall, Sherwood belonged wholly to its people. Fires of victory burned where torches of destruction had been meant to blaze. Children danced, songs rose, and the sheriff's power lay broken. Robin stood beneath the great oaks, Marion at his side, his band gathered close. The weight of years of struggle pressed on him, yet so too did the lightness of triumph. The sheriff will return, will Scarlet warned? Perhaps, Robin said, gazing at the stars between the branches. But no law can chain a people who have found their courage. Today they fought beside us. Tomorrow they will fight without us if need be. That is the true victory. Friar Tuck raised his mug. To Robin Hood, outlaw, rebel, and people's champion. But Robin shook his head. Not to me. To Sherwood and to justice. The cheer that followed shook the forest. In the years to come, bards would tell of that day, when Robin Hood faced the sheriff in the heart of Sherwood and proved that no tyrant can rule forever. The legend would grow, changing with each generation, but always carrying the same truth, that even in the darkest times, hope can rise from the greenwood, carried by those brave enough to stand. And as the night deepened, the oaks whispered with the summer wind, carrying the tale into the ages.